I apologize in advance if my voice is a little rough. I'm still getting over being sick and just gave the last of my voice out singing those last songs. So, we'll see how the night goes. Fun stuff. Alright, we have been in a series called Reason. The whole idea behind this series was that the book of 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 15 tells us to always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. We want y'all to leave Velocity Student Ministries one day knowing full well why you believe what you believe. That your faith is based on facts, and it's based on truth, and it's based on reason, and not just because I told you so. So tonight we're going to continue in that series called Reason. So, you guys ready? We're going to buckle down. We're going to learn some stuff tonight. You guys ready? Wow, that was really weak, y'all. You guys ready?
Yeah!
Very good. All right, Lee Strobel was an award-winning legal editor for the Chicago Tribune. He has a Master of Studies in Law from the University of Yale, so he's a pretty smart guy. This guy was famous for his investigative reporting. In 1979, his wife announced that she had become a Christian. While it shocked him at first, he said due to the incredible change that he'd seen in his wife, he decided to investigate the facts around the resurrection. And he documents the whole process in a book called The Case for Christ. I borrowed a lot from this book in the series. If you want to learn more about why we believe in the resurrection, it is a great place to start. It's a great book to read. Anyway, I want y'all to check out this video from Lee Strobel.
I like to look at the evidence for the resurrection in four categories. The first one is, did Jesus die on the cross? Was he dead? Virtually every scholar on planet Earth concedes that Jesus was dead after crucifixion. We have no record of anyone anywhere ever surviving a full Roman crucifixion. Even the Journal of the American Medical Association published a peer-reviewed scientific medical study of the evidence for the death of Jesus and said clearly the weight of the evidence indicates that Jesus was dead even before the wound to his side was inflicted. Even the atheist New Testament scholar Gerd Ludemann says historically it's indisputable that Jesus was dead. So Jesus was dead. The second category of evidence is the early accounts we have for the resurrection. In other words, I used to think as an atheist that the resurrection was a legend, and that took a long time to develop in the ancient world. But what I learned is that we have preserved for us a creed of the earliest Christian church, a creed that is an eyewitness-based report of the resurrection of Jesus. Now, this creed has been dated back by scholars to within months of the death of Jesus. Within months. That is historical gold. So we've got a news flash from ancient history on the resurrection. Third category of evidence is the empty tomb. And the best evidence for that is even the opponents of Jesus implicitly admitted the tomb was empty. Because when the disciples began proclaiming that Jesus had risen, what the opponents said was, the disciples stole the body. Now they're conceding the tomb's empty. They're just trying to explain how it got empty. So everybody's conceding the tomb was empty. How did it get empty is really the issue, and that goes to the fourth category of evidence, which is eyewitnesses. You know, for most of what we know about ancient history, it comes from one or maybe two sources of information. And yet, for the conviction of the disciples that they encountered the resurrected Jesus, we have no fewer than 9 ancient sources, inside and outside the New Testament, confirming and corroborating the conviction of the disciples that they encountered the risen Christ. That is an avalanche of historical data. So you put all that together and you have a really good case for Easter.
All right, so last week we covered the fact that Jesus was dead. If you have not, were you not here last week and you missed it, stay tuned because these messages are about to show up on our YouTube channel. So if you missed one, go back and watch it on YouTube. So we covered. There's a YouTube channel. Yeah. Where you been?
Obviously not here. School,
All right.
basketball practice.
So we We covered number 1 in the last week. Jesus was dead. So tonight, we're going to try and tackle the last 3 in one go. You guys ready for this? We can do it. All right, let's go. All right, let's talk about the creed. All right. First of all, we have fact. What's our next fact there? The fact is that the disciples claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. All right, here's our ancient sources that we have, historical, reliable, historical sources outside of the Bible that Jesus rose from the dead. And they pop out like this. We have 2 for this guy, the Clement and Polycarp. They're both ancient historians and writers, and they both confirm this fact that the disciples claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. Now we're going to dive into this idea of the creed that Lee Strobel poked at a little bit. If you have a Bible with you, or if you don't have a Bible with you, we're going to be in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. All right. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 7. It says this, For what I received, I passed on to you as first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, as the one abnormally born. So, Paul is actually quoting an early church creed in this passage. A creed is simply a statement of belief, and this one was taken up as the church, as this was their creed. This was what we believe that happened with the resurrection. We believe this happened with Jesus. The book of 1 Corinthians itself was written between AD 55 and AD 57. In case you didn't realize, that is super close after the life of Jesus himself. But Paul actually says that he passed the creed to the church in Corinth, meaning that he predates his visit there in AD 51, meaning that this creed was being used by the church within 20 years of the resurrection. Make sense? So we have historical evidence that within 20 years after Jesus died, the church was proclaiming that Jesus rose from the dead. But to take it even further, most scholars date this creed that Paul is talking about even earlier. A guy named Joachim Jeremias refers to the creed as the earliest tradition of all. Ulrich Wickens says, it indubitably goes back to the oldest phase in all of the history of primitive Christianity. Many scholars trace the creed even earlier, within 2 to 8 years after the resurrection. A guy named James D.G. Dunn of the University of Durham and the British Academy says this: "This tradition, we can be entirely confident, was formulated as a tradition within months of Jesus' death." So we have historical evidence, we have fact that within 2 months of Jesus dying, the church was proclaiming that Jesus had risen from the dead. You got that? It is historical fact that the disciples claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. Not to mention, we also have the Gospels themselves. All 4 of the Gospels claim the resurrection of Jesus, and the book of Acts, which were all written within 70 years of Jesus at the latest. We'll dive into more of that next week, but do you realize that the Gospels were written within 70 years of the life of Jesus? Guys, that is shorter than any other historical record that you study in school. The things you learn about Alexander the Great, about Greek history and all that, those come hundreds and hundreds of years after the event. all of the Gospels come within 70 years at the absolute latest. So it is fact that the disciples claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. All right, fact number 2. The tomb was empty and there was no body. Let's be honest, if you want to disprove that Jesus rose from the dead, all one would have to do is just produce the body, right? Use the dead body. But here we are, more than 2,000 years later, and no one has yet to find and produce the remains of Jesus. Remember, we've already established the fact that he was already dead last week. Jesus was for sure dead. And in 2,000 years since that, nobody has been able to find the body of Jesus. Because here's the thing, the Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities both knew where the body of Jesus was buried. All they would have to do was just pull it out. Go, duh! Look, Jesus is not really alive, he's dead right here. In fact, if you think about it, one could go so far as to say it would have been helpful to either the Jewish leaders or the Roman authorities to produce a body of some kind, of anybody that was dead, saying, this guy is dead, this guy is Jesus. The only reason that is not true or that didn't happen was because the disciples had already seen a risen Jesus. Does that make sense? See, none of the early critics of Christianity, such as a guy named Celsus in the 2nd century, he was famous for tearing down Christianity, but not once does anybody cite a body as evidence of the damage, as evidence to damage the spread of Christianity. None of the ancient sources ever write about a body that was found. Further, we know that the early critics of the resurrection accused the disciples of stealing the body. We see that in the book of Matthew chapter 28, but we also see this in the historical sources of a guy named Justin Martyr. You with me, CJ? We haven't checked. Oh, there we go. Justin Martyr, a book called Typho 1:8, Tertullian, and De Specialiatos. These are all 4 reliable historical sources that, these are all historical sources that claim that the opponents of Christianity said that the disciples stole the body. All of them confirm this fact that there was no body in the tomb. William Wand of Oxford University says, all the strictly historical evidence we have is in favor of the empty tomb, and those who reject it ought to recognize that they do so on some other ground than that of scientific history. It is fact that the tomb of Jesus was empty, by more historical accuracy than you could even hope for. The tomb was empty. There was no body. And lastly, fact number 3. The disciples believed that Jesus rose from the dead. Matthew chapter 28, known as the Great Commission, Jesus says that the world will know about me because of my disciples. He tells them to go into all the world and make disciples of every nation. In Acts chapter 1, verse 7 and 8, he says, you will go into all the world and spread the name of Jesus. This was the whole plan all along. The disciples were the one that were to spread the gospel and the news of Jesus. And you know what? The disciples were not only willing to share it, but they were willing to suffer and die because they believed in Jesus. Every single one of them, except for John, who later gets exiled to an island. Every single one. All the other 11 were all killed. Horrendous deaths. And they were all willing to suffer and die because they believed that Jesus rose from the dead. Don't believe me, believe these guys. 9. Those are all historical records outside of the Bible, all confirming the fact that the disciples were willing to suffer and die because they had seen the risen Jesus. Not to mention that we also have the sources of the book of Luke, and the source of the letters of Paul. An atheist known as Gerd Lüdemann says it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. Paula Fredrickson of Boston University says, I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. That's what they say, and then all the historic evidence we have afterwards attests to their conviction that that's what they saw. I'm not saying they really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But I do know that as a historian, they must have seen something. Y'all, even the people that don't believe in Jesus, even the atheist professors of the New Testament and ancient historical work say that without a fact, it is historical fact that the disciples were willing to die because they believed that they had seen Jesus. Then you can also add in the witness of Paul, the persecutor and murderer of the church, turned greatest missionary the world's ever known. A conversion based solely on the appearance of the risen Jesus. Guys, you know that Paul also saw the risen Jesus. This, by the way, puts a problem with the theories that the disciples stole the body, because then who did Paul see if, they had the body? Besides, because the fact remains that Paul converted to a Christian who was willing to die for what he believed. This is also a historical fact that is documented by Clement of Rome, Polycarp, Tertullian, Diagnosis of Corinth, and Origen. These are, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I don't have written up there. All confirming the historical fact that the Apostle Paul converted to Christianity and was willing to die because he had seen a risen Jesus. Gary Habermas, another guy that I read and borrowed from for this study, he says that I recently completed an overview of more than 1,400 sources. That's 1,400 sources on the resurrection of Jesus published since 1975. I studied and cataloged about 650 of these texts in English, German, and French. Some of the results of this study are certainly intriguing. For example, perhaps no fact is more widely recognized than that the early Christian believers had real experiences that they thought were the appearances of a risen Jesus. Historical fact. So let's do a review, shall we? Historical fact number 1. Jesus was dead, beyond a shadow of a doubt. That is fact. More fact than most of what you read in your history book. Fact number 2, the disciples claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. Historical fact. More of a historical fact than most of what you read in your history books. Historical fact number 3, the tomb was empty. There was no body. Also, historical fact. Historical fact number 4, the disciples believed that Jesus rose from the dead. That is more historical fact than anything else what we could ever hope to. That is crazy, y'all. So, we're making a case for why we believe in the resurrection is because, guys, it's fact. It actually happened. What if I told you that the Bible was more to believe than most of what you read in school anyway? Guys, the reason that we believe what we believe, the reason that we are Christians is because it actually happened. Not because somebody made it up, because this is some fun religion to follow, or because you were born into it when you came to church. But the reason behind why we're Christians, why we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, because it actually happened. Because it's proven historical fact.